Hello, and thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Larry Kavanaugh, and today we're going to be talking about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit priest, a scientist, a very good scientist with a doctorate in paleontology from the Sorbonne, and a mystic, and a visionary, and a prayerful person. Father Chardin made some intriguing discoveries in the field of evolution, and he had some intriguing theories about the field of evolution as well. His work, however, was suppressed during his lifetime. His Jesuit superiors refused to permit it to be published, as did the Vatican. However, after he died and his work was published, he suddenly became famous and recognized for what he did. In fact, the last three popes have spoken extremely highly of him. He may at one time in the future be named a doctor of the church, and he's been referenced in at least one encyclical. So with all this, I'm excited to be talking about him today, and let's get on with it.
Here's the biography of Teilhard de Chardin. We're beginning with the biography because in order to understand what he was promulgating, his vision and his science, you need to know a little something about his life history. So we won't spend long on this, but this is important. Here's a picture of Teilhard as a young man after he's ordained, I believe, because it looks like he's in his mid-20s to 30s. He, in the World War I, he was French. He was born in Auvergne in 1881. In World War I, he served as a stretcher bearer for the French. And I think at that point, he was already a member of the Jesuit order, not ordained, but a member of the Jesuit order. And he was such a good stretcher bearer that he received the French Legion of Honor for the work that he did. Very impressive. Here he is as a young priest. He received his ordination through the Jesuits, and he trained at the Sorbonne in paleontology. As a young priest, he taught physics and chemistry, and then after he received his doctorate in paleontology, he was appointed as a professor at the Catholic University in Paris. Within a year, the Jesuits said, no, we're going to send you out of France over to China, and you can do whatever you want to do in China. The reason being is that his views, as he was expressing at the university in Paris, were not in keeping with what the Jesuits wanted to see. So basically, he was exiled to China for 20 years. However, this didn't stop him from working. When he was in China, he got himself associated with a research team of archaeologists and did some important work with some of the very best people at the time. He was one of the people who helped discover the Peking Man in China. A very, very important discovery, and credit him with that. He was a good archaeologist, a good paleontologist. There is another picture of him doing his work. However, after 20 years, when he tried to return to Paris and had written his book called The Phenomenon of Man, based upon partly his research in archaeology and partly in his visions of what comes after this, that his book called The Phenomenon of Man was suppressed by the Jesuit order. They even took him to the Vatican for a trial, but they refused publication of his book and the follow-on, which was his idea of the divine milieu. Teilhard, being the loyal Jesuit and obedient priest, did not protest this, just let it happen. After his death, his book was published and became a wild sensation after 1955 in the rest of the world for what it said, even though it was still not quite in keeping with what the Jesuits or the Vatican was interested in. But look at this. There were several countries that made stamps in his honor. Later, after the 1960s, more recent popes, here's John the 23rd, began to understand the value and the import of Chardin's work. This is actually a stained glass window in a church in Germany showing Chardin and John the 23rd together. Both Pope Benedict, before he became a pope, when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger, and the current pope, Pope Francis, have recognized the value of Chardin's work. Maybe it's not going to receive the ex cathedra pronouncement that it's all correct, but it's certainly got the blessing of the Pope in that part of it is obviously scientifically correct, and part of it is a valid interpretation that one good scientist may have made to what comes after physical evolution. In fact, I'm not sure if that was Pope Francis giving this positive sign to Teilhard or if he was just giving the positive sign to the world in general, but it looks good to end that part of the presentation. Now, to get into the work that Chardin is most famous for, The Phenomenon of Man, the book actually has two parts. One, which is about 2/3 of the book, concerns the physical evolution of man. This is what the scientists can discover, what evolution tells us. It's about how the Homo sapiens was derived through the primates on up, and it's basically the science of it. The spiritual evolution, which is the second third of the book, the last third of the book, is more about how man's spirit and intellect developed. And this is where Teilhard made his own personal theories about, because the science on this is basically non-existent. But you'll see what I mean. And so the book, The Phenomenon of Man, was written around 1938 and was soundly rejected for publication by the Jesuit order, not by the publisher, and by the Vatican, because it was considered inappropriate, probably not because of the first part of the book, the physical evolution of man, but it's that second part that I think concerned the church. Let's talk about evolution. Evolution, as we would know it, occurs because of the fact that the child is not exactly the same as the parent. In one person giving birth to another person, the DNA may not be absolutely precisely replicated the same. There might be slight changes somewhere along those long chains of genes that would make the child just a little bit genetically different from the parent. Now, these differences might be good, might be bad. Actually, for the most part, a genetic change from parent to child is a bad thing. You can think of genetic changes as being, say, like the Down syndrome or others. These are not good. In fact, most genetic mutations don't help us. They actually worsen the child. But occasionally there are genetic mutations which improve or change what a person or an animal is. And over the course of many generations, these things can add up. New species can form if enough changes in the DNA have occurred. And that's what evolution is about. In the case of man, it's a long way to go from a single-celled life form even to a chimpanzee, a primate. And it's an even longer way to go through the chain of primates up until you reach the Neanderthals and the man, the Neanderthal and the Homo sapiens. But the Neanderthal was the first species to achieve something a little bit beyond just the pure physical evolution. If you take a look at the different skulls, they don't really look that much different, but the Homo erectus and the modern human are not really that much difficult. But the Neanderthal man appeared around 200,000 years ago, and there was something special about the Neanderthal. The Neanderthal, unlike anything that had preceded him, had the gift of reason. The mind of a Neanderthal could think. What do we mean by the gift of reason? Well, there are certain things that would distinguish the way a man can think from the way an animal can think. And some of the characteristics are making fire, drawing pictures, assimilating in tribes of ever-growing size, and burying the dead and wearing clothing. All of these things are characteristics of something that's beyond an animal. And the appearance of this in the Neanderthals apparently occurred at about a sudden moment in history. And it was about 200,000 years ago, plus or minus 10,000 years. And we take that to be the sign that something changed between an animal and a man. Now, don't get excited. Everybody says that you can tell human beings because their brain is so much bigger than animals. Well, not necessarily. This chart that shows a lot of things, brain weight versus body weight, the ratio, you could see anything above this solid line are critters that have higher than average brain to body ratios. And of course, man is right on up there. But wait a minute, we're about the same intelligence level if you take that as a dolphin. And a chimpanzee is also slightly more intelligent. I mean, not intelligent, but the ratio of body weight to brain weight to body weight is higher than average. You can't tell how intelligent a species is just by measuring the size of the brain versus the size of the body. That's the point of that slide. But the Neanderthal man had this extra oomph in his brain that we have and no animal has. Made clothes, buried the dead, could learn how to hunt in a sophisticated way. And that's what made the Neanderthal special. Now, why am I focusing on Neanderthal and not Homo sapiens? Well, Homo sapiens was a slightly different species from Neanderthal, but they interbred. And as a matter of fact, they interbred thoroughly to the point that we modern humans all carry in our brain a little bit of Neanderthal with us. And that's science. This is not theology. Now, what made our brain different? We're not sure, but that's what we could classify as the magic ingredient that you can't explain by physical evolution. That's probably where God steps in. There is a little bit of controversy, by the way, among scientists whether or not the original gift of reason was given just to two individuals, namely Adam and Eve, or whether it was more broadly spaced over a tribe of Neanderthals. The scientific evidence is simply not there one way or the other, and it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is it was one moment in history where intelligence suddenly appeared. Now, what about intelligence? Let's get away from the stuff we can measure, which is what our genes look like, to the stuff that we can't measure, which is how our brain works. There's good things about reason. There's Moses. He had his rules. There's bad things about us, though. We're our history is pretty bad. We've been pretty barbaric. We started out barbaric. This is ancient warfare. And is that progress towards civilization? Is that positive evolution? Well, not really. On the other hand, we've done wonderful things. Look at how well we came together to form the United States. That's a sign that surely we were getting better. But then again, Middle Ages, remember, we still had wars, and even in the 20th century, we've had wars. Question is, are we getting more civilized just because we have the power of reason? Remember, only 150 years ago, we still had slavery here in the United States, and parts of the world still have slavery even now. Yet we have the United Nations. And look at that, the central place where the United Nations meets. Isn't that interesting? That looks like a cross, doesn't it? Just pointing that out. So, are we getting better? This was a question that 떼이아르 was asking because he assumed we are getting better. This is a little chart that shows for about the last almost 100 years, if you want to look at it, we're still fighting with each other. There's still a lot of war going on. However, if you take the numbers down from about the 1940s to now, the actual number of people dying per 100,000 people population in warfare is actually going down. That's not great to still have all these wars, but is there some progress? Well, the idea is, 떼이아르's, that yes, we are progressing. From the earliest days of the Neanderthals to the Homo sapiens to now, we're progressing in two ways. Number one, we know more things because of scientific discovery. Number two, maybe our brains are more civilized. It's a good question which one wins out. But assuming we're on the path to improving ourselves from where we were, that's the second form of evolution that 떼이아르 was talking about. This spiritual and intellectual evolution, which you can't measure, or we don't have a way to measure it physically. You can dissect a man's brains from today as a man's brains from 1,000 years ago, and I don't think you'll see any difference that you can put a number to. But there's a difference. And that's the idea that we've entered a phase of human growth from the physical evolution to the spiritual and intellectual evolution, which Chardin called the noosphere, or the knowledge evolution sphere. And someday, maybe we'll achieve worldwide civilization all around. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if at some point we could continue to evolve spiritually and physically to the point where we're becoming humanity is becoming actually better, closer to God in a way. That's the idea of 떼이아르's that I'm afraid to say was maybe considered a little bit too radical, that there is an actual evolution going on, an evolution of the soul. I think the problem whereby the church had with it was that if you carry it too far, it kind of could be made to sound like 떼이아르 was saying man is becoming like God, man is becoming gods, and that's a no-no to say. We can say that man is learning. This is the idea from the old Middle Ages that someday a man is going to poke his head through the firmament, which we believed in, to see that on the other side of the firmament there's a wonderful society. On the other side of what we know of as our universe, there's a heaven. And that's what that's all about. This is what Teilhard calls the omega point, the point which we are all heading towards. He called it the omega point. It says it's a spiritual belief that the universe itself is evolving towards a higher level of material complexity, and humanity is part of it. Well, if we could achieve a development to that omega point, that would be the culmination of human existence in Teilhard's view. And it's nice. If we achieve that point, we would become not God, but we would be with God. And if we were with God, wouldn't it be nice to be like children again? Now let's proceed from the phenomenon of man to Teilhard's other famous book, which is The Divine Milieu. We're taking it after the phenomenon of man, although actually The Divine Milieu was written by Teilhard about 10 years before he wrote The Phenomenon of Man. He wrote it in 1927 or so. This is a quite different book in concept from The Phenomenon of Man. In The Phenomenon of Man, Teilhard was talking as a scientist and then making some extrapolations as a scientist. In The Divine Milieu, he's talking as a mystic. And I think he was strongly influenced by time that he had spent in China, on the influence of a lot of Eastern thinking, because you see a lot of Eastern thinking in The Divine Milieu. This is Chardin's mystical view of a lot of things, some of them fairly wondrous. First of all, we'll talk about something that kind of sounds like Einstein, space age, space-time continuum with number. But this was a heavy consideration of Teilhard, but in a different sense. No, he wasn't Einstein. But the things he was thinking about were kind of related to Einstein's. So let's talk about the concept here of space, time, and number. These are three things that make us feel very humble. Space. When you think about it, we are very tiny dots in the whole universe. The universe is bigger than we could ever possibly measure, billions of light years across and maybe more than that. And we are so small, it makes us feel like nothing compared to the existence itself. Space makes us feel very humble, very small. Time. Think about just being us as humans. How long is our lifespan? Our lifespan is maybe 70 years, give or take a little bit. Not more than 100 for almost anybody. And how long has just humanity existed? Well, from the time of the Neanderthals, 200,000 years. Even in the time of recorded history, 8,000 years of recorded history. What's 70 years in the span of 8,000 years? It's nothing. How can we feel that we can make an effect upon humanity when we have so little time relative to the span of time of humanity itself to work? Something, again, to make us humble. Number. How many human beings have lived or will live in this world? Billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions. And how many are we? I'm one. You're another. What's 1 out of 100 billion? Again, it's something to make us feel very small, very tiny, very insignificant. These three things combine to make us feel like we're just nothing at all. And they make us feel really small and very humble, and asking the question, why does God bother with us? Do we mean anything to God? As we're so small and he's so big. We're so few and he's enormous. So that's a thing to ponder, to say, and to ask yourself the question, is there anything that we can do that God couldn't do all by himself? Not really. But yet, the positive side of that is, with all that is said and done, we know that he loves us and he made us and we're his greatest creation. Here's the yin and the yang of it. The yin and the yang, a symbol for it is there, is of course an Oriental Eastern symbol, and it kind of signifies that to everything there are two sides. There's good and evil. There's big and little. There's simple and complex. Everything has two ways of looking at, two sides to a thing. And so he considers a lot of that in the concept of attachment versus detachment. We've been given a lot of things on this earth that we like to be attached to. There's one right there. It's hard not to form a quick attachment, a love of what you're looking at right there, a young little baby. But yet, somehow we feel that you can be a better person if you can achieve detachment. Can you give up the good things? Well, 떼이아르 asks the question, do you want to give up the good things? Is a clergyman a better person because he prays a lot and gives up worldly possessions? But wait, worldly possessions were given to us by God. So didn't God mean for us to have worldly possessions? Didn't God mean for us to be attached to the good things of this world? And yet, do we want to give them up? Why should we? Yet you've got attachment versus detachment. That's the yin and the yang of things. God gave us this world so that we could enjoy it. So doesn't that mean that God wants us to enjoy this world? So why do you think God wants us to give it up? Well, we got to think about that. I think the two sides of it is kind of expressed by St. Benedict. When his motto for the Benedictine order, ora et labora, you pray and you work. Prayer is important, but so is work. You can't pray all the time because you'd starve to death if you didn't work to earn your food. And work is a good thing. Getting food is a good thing. Enjoying life is a good thing. Why would you want to give it up to just pray to God? Because there's a better thing. Paulo Coelho says, you got to enjoy your work. Pray every day. Can you have fun while praying? Don't complicate life. What does that all mean? It means that, yes, this world is a good place, but there's a better. Life with God could be better. Attachment is wonderful. Detachment is wonderful too. Detachment doesn't mean that you give up what's good. It means that you seek for something which is better, and that's God. Anyway, that's 떼이아르's idea of detachment and attachment. Attachment to Christ is the secret of detachment from the world. Got it? Hope so. Now, there's the other thing that 떼이아르 worried about. Are we going to blow ourselves up? We got this bomb, this very big bomb, that if it's enough of them are set off in the right place, as we've known, could maybe blow up the whole world. Is that the destiny of mankind, to start getting along this path of evolution, this spiritual evolution, only to blow ourselves up before we reach the end? Well, 떼이아르 says, no. I think we have some faith here. God doesn't make mistakes. God doesn't play dice with the universe, as Einstein said. If God made man with the ability to get into the noosphere, with the ability to seek for the omega point, then God intended for man to at some point in time reach that omega point. Therefore, let's not worry that man's going to blow himself up. God knows we're not going to blow ourselves up. Mankind is irreplaceable. And as it says, therefore, however improbable it must seem, man's going to reach that goal infallibly. Now, this quotation that I have here is not normally quoted by 떼이아르, but it's a phrase in the Divine Milieu, which is part of a whole couple of pages chapter where he explains that he does not believe that mankind's goal is to kill itself, but that mankind's goal is to achieve unity with God. And that's very positive. The quotation that you will see more frequently, this is one of the more famous ones by 떼이아르. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. Now that is 떼이아르's vision. And that's the mysticism of 떼이아르. He was a mystic to view that. He's not one of these mystics that was given the stigmata. He's not one of these mystics that suffered. He's not one of these mystics that had visions of God. He never said that he saw God, but he had this idea that this is what God had in mind for mankind, and there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things about Teilhard that you'll find in the Divine Milieu is there's several places where he pauses to give his version of prayers. There are several that are good, but this one struck me, and I thought it might be a good way to end this program. It's his prayer on growing old, and this is just part of it. O God, after having perceived you as he who is greater than myself, grant, when my hour comes, that I may recognize you under the species of each alien or hostile force that seems bent upon destroying me or uprooting me. When the signs of age begin to mark my body, and still more when they touch my mind, when the ill that is to diminish me or carry me off strikes from without or is born within me, when the painful moment comes in which I suddenly awaken to the fact that I am ill or growing old, and above all, at that last moment, when I feel I am losing control of myself and am absolutely passive within the hands of the great unknown forces that have formed me. In all those dark moments, O God, grant that I may understand that it is you, provided only my faith is strong enough, who are painfully parting the fibers of my being in order to penetrate through the very marrow of my substance and bear me away within yourself. Teilhard, God bless you. It's been fun and enjoyable.